Welcome back to talk number 3. In this third presentation, we will be covering satellites, de-expeditions, amateur radio equipment typically used, and RayNet. Satellites. Let's start by talking about how radio is being used for space communication to and from deep space probes like Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. The probes use frequencies of the 2.3 and 8.4 GHz range to communicate back to the deep space network stations back on Earth, and these Earth stations reply using 2.1 GHz frequencies, using tens of thousands of watts to make sure its signal is received by the probes. The space between Earth and the probes is generally empty, and therefore there's nothing to block the signals going back and forth. However, the power output of the probe's radio must be kept low to keep its power efficiency. So they use a transmitter which produces only 23 watts, and to compensate for the low power, both the probes and Earth stations use very large satellite dish type antennas which are directional to focus their power and have a lot of gain. They use radio frequencies which do not have a lot of man-made interference in them as well. There are now many satellites orbiting our planet, and they are categorized into 3 main groups. These are low Earth orbit, high elliptical orbit, and geosynchronous Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit, at an altitude of 1,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface. It is a circular orbit and take 100 minutes. High elliptical orbit. At its closest point, it's a few hundred kilometers above the surface, and more than 40,000 kilometers at its furthest point. Geosynchronous Earth orbit. At 37,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface, and its speed is set so it stays above the same position on the Earth all the time. There is now modern computer software that can track satellites and display their position, the time they will be overhead, and the angle compared with your location. This allows amateur radio operators to have a very reliable radio signal to the satellite and prolong conversations and communications beyond what was likely in the past. Some of the software has the ability to control a motorized antenna array to track the satellite automatically, allowing the operator to focus on the contact and not have to track the satellite manually through the sky. ISS is a very popular satellite with the hobby. The astronauts on board are often amateur radio operators themselves, and arrange talks from the ISS to schools and other amateur radio operators on Earth. The ISS orbits at an altitude of approximately 260 miles, which, to put into perspective, is only as far as driving from Nottingham to Plymouth down near the south coast of the UK. It takes the ISS only 92 minutes to orbit the Earth. There are also other amateur satellites, normally in the low Earth orbit, including CubeSats, which send telemetry and scientific data, and possibly a voice transponder as well, back to Earth. Most amateur radio satellites have a beacon, transmitting and fitted to send their position and telemetry back to Earth. Satellites tend to be categorized by the mode of communication they use. Most FM amateur radio satellites use the 2-meter band and 70 centimeter band, and offer voice and packet radio communications. The single sideband satellites usually allow CW or Morse, voice, slow scan television, and PSK31 digital modes. CubeSat project. These are miniature satellites that are launched into space, and they're normally designed and built as a university project for students. They're made from 10 centimetre by 10 centimetre by 10 centimetre sized modules. These are typically launched as secondary payloads on a launch vehicle or put into orbit by deployers on the International Space Station. I've had the pleasure of working with the local university with their excellent teacher and students to test a satellite of this type ready for its launch. Next I'm going to talk about the QO100 satellite. The QO100 official name is the SHALE-2, and radio amateurs actually designated it the Qatar Oscar 100. The satellite was built by Mitsubishi Electric Corporation, and it weighs in about 5,300 kilos. It was launched on the 15th of November 2018 by SpaceX from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, in America, and the amateur radio service was opened on the 14th of February 2019. It's a geostationary orbiting satellite, and it orbits at about 36,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface at the equator, and it follows the Earth's rotation, and therefore the satellite appears to stand still in the sky. The signal from the satellite's narrowband transponder is received on 10.489 gigahertz. There's actually a website from the Goonhilly receiver station down in Cornwall, as you can see here, and it has a web SDR, meaning there's an SDR listening to the satellite and it's presented through a website. So regarding receiving, you can actually log into this website and listen to what's going on from the satellite. I'd highly recommend doing this, and it's a great way for somebody who's currently unlicensed to get a feel for the signals and the type of messages that are passed. Here are a few examples of footage we've taken using this particular satellite. I think you'll notice the quality is very good, both the audio and the video.
Today, I think I'm going to share with you my DATV station configuration.
As you can see, we're getting stations from all around the world. This particular radio station that's called through is from Israel.
The narrowband, and later on, I
You'll notice the wife in the background trying to shut the door because she's not interested. That's very common in our hobby. And as you can see, it's just like live television.
So I don't want to take much time.
A lot of amateur radio operators have a scrolling bar on their screen indicating what kind of equipment they have, which is really useful.
Please go ahead.
And this is all live footage. This isn't a recording. This is live being transmitted over the air. This one looks like an advert for a holiday company. And here's two hammer radio operators having a chat.
Could do ATV before. With Q100, we can do now ATV.
This is a waterfall view, monitoring the conversations that are going on the frequencies there. As you can see, it's quite a busy band. And finally, this is actually a transmission we did from one side of the room to the other. So one computer and radio is transmitting, and there we are. There's another receiver and computer on the other side of the room receiving, just to make sure everything works. And there we go. The next topic is de-expeditions. De-expeditions are generally contests in nature where a station travels to a remote location that is rare and desirable to be contacted. An example of this is Scarborough Reef. This is a lump of rock in the South China Sea that's above the waterline for only certain portions of the year. Due to the fact that this location is very expensive to travel to, tricky and dangerous to occupy, it's highly desirable as a location. The expeditions can include anything from 1 to 10 or more operators who generally take shifts to contest 24 hours a day while they're there. They're normally there for a week or two and can achieve contacts of well over 100,000 in number in that little time. These contacts can be done by voice, Morse code, digimodes, or everything under the sun. A de-expedition usually appeals for voluntary contributions to help with the costs, since these can rise into the hundreds of thousands of pounds very quickly. And as another way of helping with funding, QSL cards are produced, which are essentially specially made postcards relating to this once-in-a-lifetime event. These can be requested if you have a confirmed contact with them for usually what is a reasonable price, all considering. Some de-expeditions ask for a few pounds to possibly maybe £20 at most for the most expensive of trips, and this all helps them fund the next trip. These are not produced forever, so you must request and pay it early on before production is ceased. Let's take a look at some of these locations. The first one here is Navassa. This is a tiny little island in the Caribbean area, just below Florida and Cuba and all that sort of thing. Very remote. I don't believe it's occupied normally. There's a lighthouse on there, and they have to get special permission from the government to actually be there, and they're very particular about what you're doing, what equipment you take, how long you're there, etc. So it can be quite a challenge to get these things done. Also, you've got to carry all the gear, so you need to pay for some sort of ship to bring everything over, and a lot of these de-expeditions actually have to pay for a helicopter to lift everything ashore, so you can see where the expense is. Comores is another one, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and this is actually just off the coast of Madagascar and Africa, and again another unoccupied area that they go and do de-expeditions from. Very popular again because people aren't there normally. We've got Marshall Island. That's right in the centre of the world, in the ocean with nothing about. That's been a very popular one. And the good old favourite, Scarborough Reef. So this is where it is. You can see this is sort of the South China Sea area above Indonesia, and again in the middle of nowhere. And this is a series of rocks that are normally submerged, and at certain times of the year, and I don't believe it's every year from memory, they do actually pop above the water, and you get some poor soul who has to construct some sort of contraption on there, set up his radio, and away he goes. And again, this is monitored by the governments and all sorts, so it's a bit of a precarious situation, and as you can see, it's a precarious build that he's got going on there, and it's incredibly desirable.
Where's that? Kilowatt 5 Tango radio.
So this is an idea of what the contesting sounds like. I'll just give you a few moments to listen to this, and this is the speed.
Thank you, Kilowatt
Each
5
one of
Tango
these
radio.
is a separate contact.
Kilowatt 9 Tango radio 59177.
QSL 59 number 020.
Thank you, Kilowatt 5 Tango radio. K5TR
This
WPX
guy is clearly a very good operator.
Thank you, Kilowatt 5 Tango radio. WX7P 59179.
Roger, copy 5915.
Thank you, Kilo 5 Tango radio.
Kilo Tango 0 radio.
Again.
Kilowatt Tango 0 radio.
Kilowatt Echo 0 radio
Okay,
59180.
can you imagine doing this all day, all night for several weeks, and then handing over to the next guy? So it's incredible really how they do it, and they get hundreds of thousands of contacts in a short time. So that's de-expeditions and a bit of contesting. And here are some examples of the QSL cards that I've been sent personally. These are all contacts from all over the place, some of them in the UK, some of them Germany, and various places abroad. I've probably got 50 to 100 cards already, and it's a lovely habit that amateur radio operators have, in that when they've made a contact, particularly if it's an unusual station or a distant station, they'll make an effort to send a postcard. The postcards are tailor-made, and it will usually have the sender's call sign on it, and on the back there'll be various boxes where they can fill in the receiver's call sign, the contact information, and a nice message. So this is a lovely part of the hobby with a keepsake that you can keep forever, and it will remind you of those fantastic contacts you had over time. Next, we're going to talk about amateur radio gear. Amateurs have a wide gamut of equipment to choose from. Typically, most operators will select equipment to cover the following basics: an HF capable radio, a VHF/UHF capable radio, some sort of Digimodes interface, a computer, a large aerial for HF, a vertical white stick aerial for UHF/VHF, and coaxial cable. So regarding the radio equipment, we'll take a look at that now. This first one here is actually a handheld UHF/VHF radio. This is typically something that you would carry around with you on an event. It has fairly poor range, but is convenient and pocketable. The next is a mobile radio, and this is a radio designed to be fitted in a vehicle. It's also perfectly capable of running inside the shack, so you could have this permanently fitted, as I do, inside the Radio Shack here, and use it for FM, UHF and VHF communications. These tend to be very power efficient, but can still run up to 50 watts, no problem at all. The handheld radio that I mentioned earlier might run about 5 watts, so it's well down on power compared to these. You then have multi-mode radios, UHF and VHF radios, that are more for contesting or using Morse code, as well as FM, single sideband and so on. These are all different modes that you can use in the hobby, and a radio like this one pictured does all of that. So this is the desktop version of the previous one we saw, with more capability. Next, we have a portable HF radio, so if you wanted to go out into the fields, up a hill or a mountain, and operate on the fields in the grass, you could take a radio like this, an aerial, some sort of power supply, and have a great afternoon hiking and contacting the world. The last one here is again a desktop radio. This is an HF radio, similar to the previous portable one, but as you can see there's a lot more knobs and switches, a lot more adjustability, and this is excellent for contesting where you have to try and eke out every last sound you can to try and hear the most distant stations. So these are typically the types of radios you would see. There's obviously coaxial cable and the aerial to attach to these, and some sort of power source. The idea of radionet began in 1953 during the North Sea floods around the east of the UK. The floods damaged properties and cut off the communications infrastructure of the time. When this happened, amateur operators took their radio gear and headed out to assist the police and the emergency services by passing messages back and forth on their behalf. This was incredibly effective and helped improve the safety and effectiveness of the emergency services. Since then, the organisation has grown to over 2,000 members around the country and provided communications assistance on hundreds of events each year. The effectiveness of radionet is further enhanced by the broad range of frequencies and the equipment they have at their disposal as amateur radio operators, allowing them to adapt to almost any situation. Many of the members are ex-police, army, navy, emergency services personnel, and as such bring a great wealth of knowledge and experience to the organisation. radionet is regarded as a professional support organisation, both by the statutory and the voluntary emergency services organisations. radionet has been involved in incidents such as Zeebrugge and the Lockerbie disaster, as well as incidents of storms, flooding, telephone infrastructure failures, missing person situations, oil spills and more. I had the pleasure and privilege of being the Deputy Controller of the Derbyshire Dales radionet group for several years, and worked with my controller who was very involved in the Lockerbie disaster. He told me that upon arriving in the crash area, radio operators proceeded to create a coast-to-coast communication chain within 45 minutes, which is amazing. Considering the rugged terrain and the remote location, that really is impressive. In preparation for an emergency event, there is a lot of planning that goes into setting up the radio coverage of an area. Here is an example of an event in the Derbyshire area. This was a walking event and covers a very hilly area which presents coverage problems for mobile phones and emergency radios. It's a potentially dangerous route both because of the rugged terrain and steep hills and cliffs, but also because the weather can change suddenly and leave people exposed in freezing conditions or even wet weather. The event was taking place in the summer, with participants arriving in shorts and t-shirt, and so there was not any preparation for a sudden change in weather. Comprehensive radio coverage would be essential. As you can see from the map we were provided, this is a rugged terrain, and this is only part of the map, but you can see the detail with the hills, the valleys, and a lot of troublesome topography. Some of our events have vehicles in as well, so we have to bear in mind the types of roads and tracks they'll be in, and as you can see from this one, it's a deep valley of a track which is difficult to get communications out of. Here's a bunch of the guys getting ready for runners to go by, and the two on the right there, Robin and Dave, have been good friends of mine since the beginning. They're fantastic operators and give their time and efforts free of charge as volunteers to help others. Wonderful people in this organisation. When Raynet goes into an event, they set up a base, usually in a building, and this is where all the communications are fed back to, and our Raynet operators in there will be coordinating with the event organisers, so the event organisers know exactly what's going on throughout the day. Upon receiving a map, we typically start plotting out the area and where we feel we can reach and where we can't. On this diagram here, we've started planning where we can put a repeater to get coverage either side of a very large hill. The software these days does really help with this type of scenario, and as you can see here, the software can actually give you a profile picture to give you an idea of what is line of sight and what is not. And from that we can create a more complicated radio signal coverage area to get an idea of where the signal will reach and where it won't. This is what we use to improve coverage. This is a repeater. This is built by our team, and it includes several radios all linked together, so one is receiving and the other two are generally transmitting. And this can be placed with a mast high up on a hill. For example, just here you can see in the central part of the screen, and we can have the repeater there, and all the other stations can reach the repeater, and that will pass the message on to base or other stations, so they will always be in contact with each other. Raynet groups are scattered throughout the UK and use local events like marathons, bike races, hikes and other local events to hone and practice their skills. Joining Raynet will help you hone your communication skills and radio operating. It's a fun discipline and is a way of volunteering and giving back to the community. This is the end of Talk 3, so to wrap up, there are many more aspects to amateur radio, including digital radio, digimodes, slow scan TV, fast scan TV, microwave bands, very low frequency operating and much more. How can you get involved in amateur radio? Well, our local club here provides full training to get you into the hobby. There are 3 levels of licence: foundation, intermediate and full. These will give you a depth of knowledge that will enhance your understanding of the technology, give you versatile skills at communication, setting up radio networks, electronics, and also having fun with expeditions and contesting. The benefits of becoming an amateur radio operator are vast and wide. Some common ones are meeting new people from other parts of the country or the world. International friendships have been incredibly valuable, and having a holiday in another part of the world and meeting those friends is a wonderful experience. New skills, whether they be technical skills with electronics, techniques for creating full radio coverage over an area of difficult terrain, or having the skills in communication in case you're ever in an emergency situation. Learning forgotten skills like Morse code. I entered this hobby because my grandfather was a Morse code operator during the war and used to tell me when I was younger about what it was like to be listening to enemy signals. You may want a career in communications, and this is an excellent base to start your knowledge and experience. This hobby's been experimental in its elements, and they're at the forefront of technology. And if you have the ability to try out the latest tech and even be a part of its development, if that's what you like, then it's a very rewarding hobby. A hobby also caters for all desires and levels of learning. There are 3 examined levels of skill that you can choose to go with. The foundation gives you a grounding of knowledge on how to operate a radio, both local communications with VHF and UHF, but also internationally with HF. The intermediate level gives you a deeper level of understanding in how a radio works, so you can then build your own and use them on the air with additional privileges of extra power and increased ranges of frequencies. Full licenses give you the full knowledge of the inner workings and further privileges for how power levels work, remote control of a station, and creativity to be on the cutting edge. You can view our club website at www.snarc.org.uk. That's SNARC, which is the South Notts Amateur Radio Club, .org.uk, to view the articles section, training section, video section, etc., to get a glimpse into the hobby. If you're interested in the hobby or have any questions, please contact me using the contact tab on the website. Thanks very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.
Okay, hello, I'm Alan. I'm a third-year mech-eng student at the University of Nottingham, and the way I got into this hobby was my third-year project is a CubeSat satellite project, and it was suggested by my supervisor to give it a go and hopefully get license to test the satellite. So my initial impressions of the hobby, I knew it existed, I didn't know much about it, but I've come to find, especially the training, really good pace, well taught. The subject matter ranging from some really easy stuff we've covered in physics, maybe at secondary, to some really difficult and new stuff that it took a few sessions to sort of get my head around. But the training and the tutor was really good in getting me to understand, especially the transmitting and receiving side of it. The benefits is I've got to learn more about radio frequencies and communications in general, and I think as someone who's aspiring to do some stuff in the space sector, this has helped a lot. And the other thing is I've had the chance to meet some new people and network, which is always really good, and I've got my license, my foundation license.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Nottingham, and I was asked to do ham training as part of one of the projects I was doing to help build a cube satellite and particularly get the radio system operational for it. So when I first heard about ham radio, I kind of told my friends it was like the physics teacher from Stranger Things. So I know it does have this like public stereotype around it. But then I also did astronomy and collected Warhammer stuff, so I kind of know what the territory is like with that. But since I've started it, the people are really good, and they're just really glad that there's young people being involved in it, and they're really welcoming and helpful and everything. So as I kind of got more into it, I found I was enjoying it more and more, and kind of started to think about what I would want to do with it more than just how I originally started. It's just another part of work. So I'm kind of now thinking of using it for outreach lessons. Maybe we could get the ISS and you can listen to the ham radio on there, or you can track other satellites in space and their beacons with it. So there's lots of cool things like that. The lessons are really informative and the teaching's really good. It was very helpful for me to have done sort of physics before at university, but honestly, I don't think you need it. And as long as you're getting taught right and you enjoy it, you'll be absolutely fine.
Hi, my name is Robin. I'm a third-year aerospace engineering student at the University of Nottingham. I was offered the opportunity to join the South Nottingham Amateur Club to help design a CubeSat and operate the ground station for the university. I found the lessons were extremely difficult in some sense, but it was ranging in difficulty from information you may have encountered in secondary school to exciting new concepts that you might find on the course. Upon completing the training, I've seen an additional benefit on taking the training for my modules and projects at university. Being part of the hobby has inspired me to work with the projects involving radio frequency systems, as the hobby covers theory about antennas, transmitters, and much more. Lastly, I'd like to add that the training will involve having an amazing shooter like Simon, who will help demonstrate new concepts to you that you may encounter during the course.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm working on a CubeSat project at University of Nottingham and recently got involved with the South Notts Amateur Radio Club. Originally I assumed that the radio amateur hobby was for solitary-minded people, but I was surprised to find out that the community surrounding it is extremely active and very friendly. A lot of the appeal seems to be the friends you make and the people you get to interact with, whether at events or over comms. Especially now during the pandemic, I think it's a great hobby to get involved in. I got into ham radio because I needed a license to communicate with a satellite that I was helping to develop at my university. I found the subject matter to be very approachable, and I actually enjoyed the training, in no small part due to my teacher, who seemed to have limitless patience, and who even sacrificed a lot of his spare time to lend his expertise to my team. The training was absolutely worth doing, as it's given me skills that I can transfer over to my uni studies, and which are an absolute necessity for space projects, which have become the focus of my postgrad.
Hi, my name's Maddie and I'm a mechanical engineering student at the University of Nottingham. I started my ham foundation training in October-November, and I just passed my foundation licence exam a couple weeks ago. I'd actually never heard of ham radio before, but I really enjoyed it. I had weekly online lessons over Zoom with about 6-7 of the students and then a teacher, and everyone's just really enthusiastic and very patient and very welcoming, and it's really fun. And now that I've got my call sign and my foundation license, I can I can do my job as the communications engineer for my uni project, because we're making a prototype of a satellite, and I'm sure that will be very helpful for me moving forward as an engineer doing my own projects and maybe projects with uni and work and stuff. And I'm definitely going to get my intermediate license in the next couple of months, I think, because it's a really useful skill to have and it's really fun and everyone's really nice and I highly recommend it.